Let us begin by the most foundational term we can use in theology, and that is God. What do we mean when we talk about God? We don't mean a great big person out there someplace, older, wiser, stronger than you and me. That's Zeus. You can baptize Zeus. You can confirm Zeus. You can give Zeus first communion. But Zeus stays Zeus. That's not what we mean by the word God in the wider Christian tradition. Essentially, the word God in Catholic theological discourse is a bit of shorthand for the mystery which grounds and supports all that exists. We are talking about mystery. Now, that's immensely important to keep in mind. It's immensely important to keep in mind because the great danger for all theologians is that having said we're talking about mystery, we then natter on like we know what we're talking about. You see, the first thing to realize about speaking theologically is that we are skating on very, very thin ice over infinitely deep pools. That we are in fact talking about what cannot be talked about. So why not simply keep silent about it? Why not follow Ludwig Wittgenstein's famous dictum, the last proposition of his Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus? You may have seen the movie. The last proposition of that about which we can say nothing, let us be silent. Well, you see, there's great wisdom to that. It is an important thing to be reminded periodically as theologians, indeed as religious believers, that we're speaking about what cannot adequately be said. But we can't leave it with Wittgenstein's dictum, because, to quote T.S. Eliot, who's speaking about poetry, but I think it applies perfectly well to religious language, there are some things about which we can say nothing and before which we dare not keep silent. There are some things that you know you'll never say correctly, you'll never say adequately, but you also know you cannot be silent about. For example, I love you. Are there 3 more hackneyed words in the English language than I love you? You know that it doesn't scratch the surface of what needs to be said, but you can't simply say, all right, then I'll be silent. I won't bother trying to say it. It has to be said, but you know it's never going to be said fully, adequately, properly. The same is true when we talk about the absolute mystery, which is God. Now, let me hasten to point out there are 2 ways that we speak about something in English, at least 2 ways, that we speak about something in English as mystery. One is the Agatha Christie, the Sherlock Holmes sense of mystery, in which there's something which is unknown, there's a puzzle, and if we could simply get all of the data, the clues, and get them arranged in the right order, it clicks into place, and we know the butler did it, and the mystery is solved. That's not what I mean when I say God is mystery. I'm talking about mystery in a much richer sense. Let me, if I may, give you my favorite example for this, from one of the wisest books of the 19th century, and I mean that quite sincerely, namely Alice in Wonderland. As with all truly challenging works of literature, when adults are confronted by a book that really shakes them to their foundations, they turn it into children's literature. We did it with Robinson Crusoe, we've done it with Huckleberry Finn, we've done it with Gulliver's Travels. Gulliver's Travels, of all books to think of as children's literature. It's like saying, give me a little boy, here's a razor blade, play with this. I wouldn't let anybody read Gulliver's Travels until they were 50, at least. Well, in Alice in Wonderland, marvelously insightful book about going through adolescence. Remember, Alice is always too big or too small, you know, precisely the experience of the adolescent. You're too big, you're too little. You're too big to act that way, you're too young to do that. Alice is always in between. And at this point of the story, you remember, she tells us she's 1 3/4 inches tall. she bumps into the caterpillar, who is seated on a mushroom, smoking a hookah, a water pipe, and blowing smoke rings. And she asks the caterpillar, could you tell me how I can find the white rabbit? And the caterpillar responds, puffing smoke in her face, who are you? And Alice says, perhaps I'm not making myself clear. Don't worry about the white rabbit. Can't you tell me how I can find my way back to the rabbit hole so I can go home? Who are you? And this continues for several more questions from Alice. Now, what's really happening in the conversation? Well, let me point out, Lewis Carroll, Charles Dodgson, Carroll, as you know, is his pet name, Dodgson taught mathematics and mathematical logic throughout his life at Oxford. Wonderland is filled with logicians. Everyone in Wonderland is a logician, except Alice and the reader, which is why Alice and the reader find everyone in Wonderland so difficult to deal with. It's not that they are irrational, it's that they are, as it were, hyper-rational. It's Alice who looks mad to them, just as they appear mad to Alice. And you notice what happens when Alice speaks to the caterpillar. Every question she asks contains the first personal pronoun singular. How can I find the white rabbit? How can I go home again? And the caterpillar, logician that he is saying, how can I possibly answer your question until you define your terms? What is this I you keep speaking of? Who are you? Now, notice, he's not asking, give me your name, because we in English know by any other name, a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. It's not a name, it's not a job description, he's asking for a definition. It's not a definition of what a human being is. It's a definition of what a you is. Define you. And of course, Alice's frustration, like the reader's, is the discovery that she can't do it. She can't define herself. That Alice, like each of us, remains mystery to ourselves. Well, it's certainly not because we don't have enough data. Who has more data on you than you? Who do you have more data on than you? It's not that we have to get more clues. It's that we are too intimately connected with the question to be able to answer it fully. It's that we cannot get perspective on the question. It's that the question is too intimately involved with our very being. That's the kind of mystery that I'm speaking of when I say God is mystery. Not God as the utterly distant, but God as the intimately involved and connected. The God that cannot be simply sorted out from God's action in creating everything, including me. So when we speak of God, we're speaking of absolute mystery. But how do you talk about absolute mystery at all? Well, think of the way Scripture does it. Scripture actually is the model for the way in which I think anyone speaks about God in the Christian tradition. We pile up metaphors. So in Scripture, we hear that God is creator, God is parent, God is spouse, God is lover, God is king, God is general, God is potter, God is leader, God is general, God is judge, God is lawgiver, God is artist, God is image after image after image after image is piled up in order to describe God. And the interaction of those metaphors, those images, is how we talk about God. Fine. But can anything be used as an image of God? Clearly there are metaphors that we wouldn't accept. If I said to you, for example, God is hatred, you would say, oh, no, we don't believe that. God is evil. No, we don't believe that. Well, what is the basis for distinguishing between all of these images, which are possible metaphors for God, more or less helpful images for God, and those images that are simply ruled out? You can't say that about God. What's the basis for that discrimination? Is there, as it were, a fundamental metaphor, a metaphor which the Christian tradition privileges and maintains anything you say about God must be reconcilable with this? If it's not reconcilable with this image, then it's ruled out. I think there is such an image. You find it all over the place in the New Testament documents, but it gets its clearest, sharpest, simplest form in one of the last documents of the collection of the New Testament written, namely the document we call the First Letter of John, chapter 4, verse 8, and again verse 16, God is love. But a particular form of love, agapic love. God is agape. Agape being a word in Greek that describes a love which seeks nothing from the person or thing loved, that is purely centered on the good of the beloved, not on the satisfaction of the lover. It is pure, I like to translate it as self-gift. It is the gift of self to the other. That is the least wrong way of trying to talk about, to think about the fundamental mystery, the mystery that grounds and surrounds all that exists, quote unquote, God. That God is self-gift. Now, think about that with me for just a moment. God is self-gift. God is love. Well, you see, as Augustine noticed 15 centuries ago, that's not saying that God is a lover. We don't say that God is the subject of love or even the object of love. We say God is love. We are naming God least wrongly by a relationship, an action perhaps, rather than by as a person. We don't say God is one who loves or that God is a lover. We say God is love, the name of a relationship. And if you say to yourself, well, this is all well and good, but that sounds rather odd to me, that we're talking about the word God as being more the name of a relationship than the name of a person. It's more like a verb than a noun. Yes, but I'll bet you've said it at least once or twice already today. Every time we say that we are going to do or say something in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Spirit, we're saying that we're not acting in the name of the one, but in the name of the relationship of the three. That the whole doctrine of the Trinity is an enormous exploration and expansion of the claim that the mystery which grounds and surrounds all that exists is least wrongly thought of as being pure and perfect self-gift. Now, when we say that everything is called into being, everything rests on a mystery, it's supported on a ground which is pure and perfect self-gift, what we are saying, it's an extraordinary claim, is that everything exists because it's love.